When the Germans took over the Netherlands in 1940, Dutch policemen were in a dilemma. Keep functioning under German rule or give up your job. There were officers who collaborated and actively participated in the persecution of Jews and resistance fighters, but there were also officers who, especially as the war progressed, developed serious conscientious objections and resigned from the job. Yet, the Germans would show no mercy for these. In this video, you will learn about the role of the Dutch police in World War II. Good to have you back on the channel. If you're new, my name is Stefan. I'm a Dutch history teacher and I make videos about history for you. If you like that, please consider subscribing and don't forget to hit the notification bell. And you can support me by buying a coffee for me, because I love coffee. But let's start with this episode. After the capitulation of May 15th, 1940, the Netherlands came under civilian German occupation rule. But what exactly did that mean for civil servants and the police in particular? A radio address by then Prime Minister Dirk-Jan de Geer, a few days after the surrender, gave an idea of what the government in exile expected of the civil service in the homeland. While the government intends to do its duty, it hopes that other administrative bodies in the Netherlands will not neglect their duty. Their duty now is as best they can to cooperate with the German authorities and thereby help the population as much as possible. This strategy was intended on one hand to maintain peace and order and on the other hand to prevent as much as possible the occupiers' own administrative posts from being taken by collaborators. But cooperating with the occupier did not mean serving the entire population. It soon became apparent that the police was expected to act against their own people. This became clear, for example, on August 31st, 1940, during Queen's Day, when citizens who chanted orange slogans or walked around with flowers had to be punished. Already in the first year of occupation, the Germans also instituted the so-called Aryan Declaration in preparation for the dismissal of Jewish civil servants. All civil servants and teachers had to declare in writing that they did not belong to the Jewish community. Not only Jews were barred from the police force, police chiefs who were not loyal enough to the satisfaction of the occupier were also replaced, usually by NSB members. The NSB was the Dutch Nazi Party. The Dutch police thus became more and more a tool in German hands. Because of the Aryan Declaration and other anti-Jewish measures implemented by the occupying forces, another directive for civil servants was formulated in late 1940 via Radio Orange. Dutch citizens were urged to refrain from rapprochement with the occupier. About that occupier, it was mentioned during the broadcast on November 6, 1940. There are numerous things which he may not ask of the population. He may not punish citizens for disposition which they, before the occupation, showed toward his country. He must not persecute them on the ground that they belong to a certain political party, a certain race, a certain ecclesiastical community, even if such a race, such a party, such a community are not tolerated in his own country. In the first months of the occupation, many police officers waited to see what happened. Initially, not much changed and the Dutch police leadership seemed to be in charge of their own affairs. In the summer of 1940, as many as 6,000 new officers were hired, a reinforcement that many police officers had been waiting for a long time. The Germans found the Dutch police organization with its gemeentepolitie, koninklijke marechaussee, politietroepen, Rijksveldwacht en gemeenteveldwacht too complex and soon decided to reform. The marechaussee lost its military status and predicate royal. In addition, the police forces were abolished. The so-called Directorate General of Police became the central Dutch leadership. SS General Hans Rauter was appointed as the German police chief in the Netherlands, the supreme boss. Arthur Seyss-Inquart, the Austrian Reichskommissar of the Netherlands, had determined that maintaining public peace Order and security was partially the responsibility of the Dutch police. The latter, however, came under the authority of the Germans. The Rijkskommissar needed the support of the regular police, as the occupying forces themselves were far from having sufficient manpower. For example, the Sicherheidsdienst in the Netherlands consisted of no more than 400 German personnel. There was also, for example, the Ordnungspolizei or Groene Polizei, but they too had insufficient manpower. The NSB, the Dutch Nazi Party, which openly collaborated with the Nazis, had its own black uniform paramilitary movement, the Weerbaarheidsafdeling, the WA. After the Groene Polizei arrested 400 Jewish men in Amsterdam in February 1941, strikes broke out in the capital. A month after this February strike, the occupying forces established the Police Training Battalion, the POB, in Schalkhaar. Here, reliable policemen were to be trained. Officers received military training, but were also educated in Nazi racial doctrine. After 6 months of training, the officers were added to regular corpses. In this way, the occupier tried to gain more control over the Dutch police force. The name Schalkhaar soon became to symbolize bad cops. Those who were offered training in Schalkhaar sometimes face a dilemma, one officer mentioned. In fact, I had little choice. Either I took the job with the police or I had to go to the AEG factories in Berlin. Now, Schalkhaar had a bad reputation and I did not feel much like being Nazified there. As a convinced Catholic, I decided to ask the bishop for advice. During an audience, I was advised to join the police. In the Dutch police, I could do more for the Dutch people than in Berlin. Moreover, there was another Dutchman who was not working in the service of the occupier. A sensitive point in the history of the police of the Netherlands in World War II is the involvement of officers in the deportation of Jews. The fact is that Dutch policemen were used to round up Jews. For example, during raids, the Dutch administration was charged with carrying out most anti-Jewish measures anyway. For example, in June 1941, a few months after the February strike, 250 Amsterdam policemen were deployed in the capital to arrest over 200 German and Dutch Jews. Officially, they were to be interrogated by the SD. However, it soon became clear that the arrested Jews had been transported to Mauthausen concentration camp. Municipal police forces were also repeatedly deployed during raids in other cities in the period that followed. Wim Croiset van Uffelen, Inspector General of the Dutch Police, complained to Jaap Schrikke, Secretary General of the Department of Justice. Croiset van Uffelen felt that the police should not be used to round up Jews who had done nothing wrong. He found no audience with Schrikke, an NSB member, who argued that the police simply had to do what was required of them. On the streets, a cop was recognizable to citizens. Hiding behind a desk was difficult. Was he finding someone for traffic violation? Then it was a crowd friend. And did he get in trouble with the enemy? Then he was a good patriot. Was the officer following the orders of the occupying forces who were becoming increasingly criminal, or was he using his own moral compass? There is a gray zone between collaboration and resistance. Accommodation. Benevolent officers again faced a dilemma. If one resigned, then one could be sure that the vacant spot would immediately be taken by an NSB officer who would have no difficulty in carrying out the anti-Jewish measures. If one remained in his post, they would be collaborating. For Croiset van Uffelen, a marechaussee officer before the war, this was also, by his own admission, one of the reasons for keeping his job. In addition, he could hardly afford to resign financially, as he had to pay alimony to 2 wives. In May 1942, he was removed from his post and taken into captivity. After the war, to his own dismay, Croiset van Uffelen was not allowed to return to the police force. In February 1943, the church made itself heard and issued a document, drafted by Dutch bishops and other clergy, addressed to Seyss-Inquart. The letter had a clear message. Police officers were no longer to cooperate in rounding up young men for labor in Germany and arresting and persecuting fellow Jews. After this call, some officers began to openly refuse work. others decided to go into hiding. To prevent this, the occupying forces introduced a separate measure, the Sippenhaft. Family members of policemen in hiding had to be rounded up and taken to Vught concentration camp. By the end of 1943, 150 relatives of policemen were already imprisoned in Vught. A total of 600 policemen went into hiding from the summer of 1943 to the summer of 1944. After several armed acts of resistance and setbacks on the battlefields in Europe and North Africa, the attitude of the occupying forces became increasingly fierce. In 1943, and the Netherlands entered a spiral of violence. The number of death sentences against Dutch citizens increased alarmingly, and the Germans introduced a police law which meant that from now on those arrested could be shot without trial. Resistance also hardened. Wrong cops were increasingly targeted for attacks. The pro-German officers clumped together in groups or hunted for people in hiding and Jews. The resistance did everything possible to frighten this group. Yet small groups of collaborators managed to do a lot of damage. The prestige of the police was damaged by them for years to come. After liberation, a purge operation was set up to purge the police force of the bad cops as quickly as possible. Officers who were members of the NSB, the WA, or the SS were immediately fired. Even training in Schalkhaar could mean dismissal. Other officers were suspended during the time that their behavior was under investigation. Between 40 and 45% of the police officers were investigated. Of these, nearly 12%, 1,954 police officers, were fired. Of the policemen who were on duty at the end of the occupation, a total of 19% were punished. 81% of the total police force received no punishment. Under the special justice system, 9 policemen were sentenced to death and executed. Dozens of police officers received prison sentences, especially National Socialist chiefs of police and department heads and employees of special units who had tracked down and arrested Jews in hiding and resistance fighters. 15 years after liberation, none of these were still in prison. They had served their sentence or had been pardoned. Learn about why exactly so many Dutch Jews were deported. Click here. Learn about the German plans for the Netherlands. Click here. Thank you so much for watching, and the History Hustler is signing off.